It's Wednesday, August 26, 2015, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are Missouri School of Journalism colleagues Mike McKean and Ernest Perry. On our program this week, Finding the Moral Compass. So many of us got into journalism to right wrongs, to speak truth to power, but at what point do we cross the line? There have been a couple of national and local stories that have put us to the test recently. Wanted. A political reporter less like Paula Zahn, more like Zoe Barnes. It's a House of Cards reference that carries a bit of a double meaning. And hackers stole their information. Should the media be naming those Ashley Madison subscribers? We'll talk about the ethics of reporting using illegally obtained data. There's a lot more, hopefully, that we're going to get to as well, but let's start with the horrible, shocking story this morning coming out of Roanoke, Virginia, where a man walked up to reporter Allison Parker and photographer Adam Ward and shot and killed both of them during a live shot on WDBJ-TV's morning news program today. He also shot the woman that Parker was interviewing at the time. The suspect is Vester Flanagan, a former employee at that television station. I found out about this morning while I was teaching one class, ended up talking about it with students in another. This is a shocking thing to experience.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you don't know what's going on. Mm-hmm. The program is going live. There was no, it was basically a live shot talking to a Chamber of Commerce official about something new that was going on in the area.
It was a lighthearted feature. It wasn't as though
they
were covering a neighborhood that was ridden with crime or on a spot news story where one might feel potentially unsafe to begin with. This was as light and easy and within a comfort zone as you can get.
Well, in some ways, it's, I hate to say it, not shocking in terms of all the gun violence that we see, but it's only shocking, I suppose, because journalists have seemed to be immune domestically from this kind of thing. It's also shocking, I suppose, just because the fact that this former journalist actually videotaped the shooting itself. It wasn't just that it happened live on TV and people saw that, but the killer or the accused killer, the shooter who's now dead, he took a video with a GoPro camera or something while he was committing the murders. And so it's disturbing in a lot of ways, but I'm not sure that it's as shocking as it should be. Yeah, I mean, what even makes it more disturbing is that he took the time to post that onto, I think, his Facebook page and Twitter before the cops caught up with him and he decided to shoot himself, and then subsequently he died in the hospital. But what I find disturbing about all of this is that as this was playing out, you had the usual cable channels, news channels, and that sort of thing, just putting out information, and a lot of it was wrong. Some of it they quickly backtracked on, and then they came out with some other information. So, I mean, I think in our quest to have information now, we still need to sort of back up a minute and do some reporting before we just start putting the information out there. But what made it tricky for them, and I'd have to say this, what made it tricky for cable news and others who was putting the information out there is that the person himself, the suspect himself, was putting information out there that they had to respond to
and verify that at the same time.
And verify that information. Right.
I would say that at least I watched the three main cable channels to see what they were doing. I spent perhaps more time on CNN, and one of the things I think they learned, at least from the Boston bombings, was the fact that despite the fact people on Twitter were identifying incorrectly the suspect, they not only didn't take the bait, but Brian Stelter, their media columnist and reporter, actually was talking about how people were incorrectly identifying the suspect and that we needed to be careful and people should watch out what they're seeing on social media. So from that standpoint, at least one outlet got it right.
One of the things, too, that comes into play here, the gentleman who was shot and killed, I believe Adam Ward, his fiance was the producer of this news program back in the control room. She watched as he was shot and killed. There were also posts on Facebook that another employee at the television station had been personally and romantically involved with Allison Parker. The idea of the secondary trauma that the people who work in this newsroom are inevitably going through today and will continue to be.
To cover this story
Right.
while they're going through all of that. In fact, I don't think the trauma is probably going to set in until a couple of days from now, really, whenever they don't have the excuse or the opportunity to be reporting this story. It's really going to hit them after that.
Yeah, and then they're also going to have to deal with the memorial services for their colleagues and stories from other news outlets that are coming out, because now they're in the spotlight. Instead of them covering the news, they actually are the news, and that's going to put them in the process of reliving this trauma over and over and over again.
And not only are they going to have to relive just the basic trauma of what happened, but of course the alleged gunman was making claims on Facebook and Twitter that he had a beef with both the station that was racially motivated. He had a beef with those two particular employees. They're going to have to hash all that out. There's this manifesto, as some people are calling it. Supposedly he sent a 23-page fax to ABC News overnight before the shootings occurred. They've turned that over to law enforcement. When are we going to find out what's in that? They're going to have to deal with whatever kinds of crazy rationalizations this guy was coming up for the shooting. So there's a lot they're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, there was an EEOC complaint that he filed about a year after he was let go from the station. That went to court, and the judge threw that out, saying that there was no cause for the complaint. And so the station, I guess, presumably thought that this was over, that he was gone and everything was okay, even though, as you said before we went on the air, Mike, that, people had seen him around town and it was an uncomfortable situation. They didn't seem to see this coming, at them from whatever vantage point they were at. So.
Interestingly enough, though, when this man was let go 2 years ago, there was enough concern on the human resources side to make sure that there was additional security police presence at the time they let him go, and escorted out by police, because there was perceived to be that opportunity for a volatile reaction. There was just this belief at this point, 2 years later, that enough of that had subsided.
I'm really interested in a lot of different aspects of this story, and the one that I think we saw having to be dealt with in two separate occasions today was whether and how any news outlet was going to use any of that video. I mean, some of the outlets did run the initial shooting video that ran live on the station at
including
least
the
once.
station itself.
Yeah, at least once or twice.
And they've put it on its website. We're not going to show it or use it in this program.
Although there were several of the outlets that said after they ran it maybe the first time or two, they weren't going to run it anymore. And then we find this video that was posted on social media that the shooter had shot, and that was available for a very short period of time, and the networks had it. None of them chose to show any of that video. I think it's the right call, but it's something that you have to think about when you're in the midst of coverage like that.
Yeah, I think it's the right call on the part of the networks. I still wonder, though, whether or not at some point in the future that video comes out and it's up on YouTube or wherever someone can get it, and people begin to replay that over and over again, and what kind of lasting impact does that have? I mean, is that going to be used in the right way to talk about workplace violence and to talk about issues that you have in human resources and HR and dealing with employees who are let go under not so good circumstances? Or is that video going to be used mainly just to say, hey, this is what could happen? I mean, as something salacious or something like that. So
this all started coming to light during the 8 o'clock hour here in mid-Missouri. At that point, I was team teaching a reporting class. At 9 o'clock, I team teach an editing class and talked to my colleagues and said, hey, we're collapsing today's intended lecture. We're going to talk about this today. And Ernest, you said to me when you first heard that, you did that before all the details even came out. And I said, well, we kept incorporating them as we found them out. But what we really started this conversation with was a talk and a discussion about safety and safety in the field and empowering students to raise their hand and tell us as their editors, and not only while they're here working in our newsrooms here at the School of Journalism, but when they're out in the professional world as well, not to be afraid to raise their hands and say, I don't feel safe in this situation. I'd like another photographer to come with me. I'd like to have a little bit more backup. What other lessons might you see in how we can bring this to our students?
I'm not exactly sure we can draw clear lessons yet. I mean, one of the things you pointed out off the air is that you'd been monitoring what the news directors at our radio station and our television station were telling their students, and they were basically trying to reassure them that because, you know, there was a relationship between the shooter, a former employee, and the people who were killed, that maybe there wasn't such a need to worry about copycat or to draw a whole lot of lessons from this.
We can't guarantee that.
I get that, but I'm not exactly sure that's true.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think in terms of the nature of copycat shootings, when people, disturbed people, see that not only did this guy do it on air and get all the attention he's getting, but he used social media where he got to control, quote unquote, the story with his own take on what he did. I worry a lot about copycats, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I worry about copycats in all of these shootings. And it really goes back to the point of, you know, we have a serious issue with gun violence in this country and people who should not have access to weapons having access to weapons. And we've talked about it on this show. We've talked about it nationwide, but little has been done in terms of legislation, in terms of policy, in terms of actually dealing with both the mental health aspects of it, but also with the actual ability to have access to guns. And I think that at some point, I hope at some point we begin to address those issues. And I think now that this has happened to the media, involving
it doesn't get closer to home.
It gets a lot closer to home for us as journalists.
Today it does not get closer to home than it did today.
And do you think that has anything at all to do with this story getting wall-to-wall coverage, or is it just so bizarre, so different, so tragic that it would have been covered regardless? The way it's being covered, wall to wall, ever since 6:30 this morning until now, that's all you're seeing on cable news.
There's a little Donald Trump on CNN that they're beginning to sprinkle in now that we're at the midday point when we're recording this program. I've seen some of that.
But I do think you make a very good point, Mike. Yeah. I think it's both. I think it's the fact that this was so out of the norm that it's getting covered, and I think the fact that it's sort of one of our own kind of coverage, and I think you're gonna see that, particularly from the cable news, but even from local stations, because this was a local station, and
it was a local station in a relatively small market,
right.
Roanoke, Virginia. The reporter was 24 years old, probably her first or second job out of her college experience. These could have been any one of the students we work with on a regular basis.
And I mean, there's something about, you know, local stations, and local stations will pick this up because there's sort of a sense of family there. They connect with one another in a way that the national networks and the cable networks don't. So.
In fact, it actually leaves me wanting to see more of the local coverage. Then I think at some point we'll be saturated with the national coverage. There's certain things we still want to know, but I'd like to see more of the local coverage.
Well, one of the things that was nice, at least from my perspective in watching some of the midday coverage on CNN, is that the station involved is a CNN affiliate. And at 11 o'clock Central Time today, when their noon show went on the air, CNN just kicked it right over and put their local affiliate coverage as it was covering this incident involving them directly on the air. And we got that. It's as raw and as unencumbered as it can be.
And I'd be real interested to see how the community itself reacts to this, because there could be something that comes out of that Roanoke area that deals with those issues I was talking about in terms of mental health and gun violence and that sort of thing.
Especially on the heels of the Virginia Tech shooting,
exactly,
too. There's a lot of parallels in how this went down with the manifesto and a couple of other things as well.
In fact, and you have a Virginia Tech graduate, so I think the cameraman had a connection to Virginia Tech in some way. So I think that's also going to or could have an impact on how this plays out as we move forward.
So I know we talked a little bit about this concept a bit earlier this summer when the Supreme Court handed down its decision on marriage equality, but there was an article in Editor and Publisher that gave me reason to pause and to think about some things that have been happening in the past week or so on our own campus here at the University of Missouri. Dan Gilmore writes that all journalists need to be activists, at least part of the time. Let me read you a paragraph from his piece. He says, quote, "Even those journalists who worship at the altar of objectivity should recognize that on at least some issues, they cannot possibly be objective or neutral, or at least they should not be. On some issues, we have to take stands, even though those stands might put us at policy odds with the people and the institutions we cover." His piece resonated a lot with me because of things we've been experiencing on our own campus. Even, a few hours ago, our graduate students walking out on, in some cases, classes, walking out on TA and research assistant responsibilities to protest and to make aware their situation with what happened with health insurance and cuts in tuition waivers and a couple of other things. And it's interesting because it presents a unique situation for our newsrooms, because a lot of the staff in those newsrooms are those same graduate students who are affected by this issue.
Yeah, it's true. And apparently our newsrooms have all taken strides to make sure that there's no conflict of interest by having only undergrads cover the story or by having paid staff cover the story. And I think that's the right thing to do. But this is a topic that comes up all the time. I mean, Gilmore was talking specifically about issues involving freedom of the press and freedom of expression, access to information, where we needed to be advocates. And I get that, but this comes up in a lot of other occasions. I hate to mention Donald Trump, but yesterday we had Jorge Ramos, who's, prominent anchor for Univision, who was, I would argue, even though Trump had no right to throw him out of the news conference, he was acting as much as an advocate as he was a journalist in trying to make the case about how Trump's policy on immigration
and
was
others
wrong.
are making that argument. You're not the only one who's making it and saying that he had left that objectivity at the door.
Well, I think we're in a time right now, and we've talked about it on this program, where our media has become much more partisan. And I think this is playing out because we have journalists who are saying, wait a minute, we need to call out certain people who are saying things that can be detrimental to us personally, as well as to those in which we have a personal connection to. And the people of color have always had a history of practicing advocacy journalism. So what happened yesterday involving Donald Trump doesn't really surprise me, because a lot of those stations and a lot of those media outlets have done that historically. But I think what we're also seeing is that you have younger journalists who are trying to figure out where do I fit in the social justice movement? Where do I fit in with all the things that are going on involving violence that we talked about, gun violence and mental health, a whole host of issues that we bring up. And some of them feel as if, when I ask questions and I'm not getting responses, or I'm trying to get answers and those answers aren't very helpful to the democracy, then I need to push back, and that pushback can look like advocacy.
And I don't argue that even against a place for advocacy. There's always been advocacy journalism, and there's so many outlets for media now. It's perfectly acceptable for journalists to, show their cards. I just worry about whether or not journalists working in, quote, traditional news operations feel like that's okay as well. And I think there's a line to be drawn somewhere. It's not as bright as it used to be, but there still ought to be a line.
Yeah, I think you're right that there should be a line, but I think what's happening is that when you see the proliferation of the cable news outlets in the direction that they're going, and now social media with all these specialized areas where people are practicing journalism in particular ways that don't necessarily match up with the traditional legacy media and the way in which they've operated for over half a century.
Well, while we're talking about issues of ethics, let's switch to the subject of that Ashley Madison website hack. Ashley Madison, an online dating site, I guess you could say. It's meant for married people looking to cheat. Well, imagine this. Last week, some radio hosts in Australia invited listeners to call in and name people they suspected of cheating, and then the hosts scoured the database looking to see if those names were in there. Take a listen to this caller on the Fitzy and Wippa show.
You've rung us. You're a little bit suspicious about your partner.
Yeah, his hours have changed and things like this. And when that little thing came on the news about the Ashley Madison hack, he sort of went a bit funny. And
we've got his details here. and we put them into the... I feel like we're on Jerry Springer, man. I feel like we... Because this is weird, because we're putting him into this website right now, and his details have revealed... Put it in. That he's actually on the website, Joe.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah, no,
These websites are disgusting, and that girl that called before, she should be ashamed of herself.
Yeah. Oh, Joe's gone.
Oh, I don't know if we should have done that.
Here in the U.S., several reality TV stars have been named, as well as some political leaders. I don't want to go into the merits of each one of those individual cases. I feel like that's almost not even fair to do to those people, although I will admit when I saw some of the reality star names, I did click on those stories. I wanted to know more. I want to talk about the heart of this, though, the idea of reporters digging through stolen data and naming names, and if that's fair to do to the people who are on that list.
Well, I mean, digging through stolen data by itself is not unique, and in some instances, I think you could even justify it. Edward Snowden, we justified it. Pentagon Papers. You can name a whole bunch of investigative stories where illegally gotten information is used to tell a story. But that's because the public importance of that story was great enough that you can overcome the ethical challenges of using the stolen data. I have a hard time believing, except in one exception, that applied to the Ashley Madison stuff. I thought the AP's story, where they found but didn't name high-level government employees who might be, blackmailed because they were on this site. That was a relevant story. All this stuff with the hypocrites, the Josh Duggars or whatever, I find that to be a little less justifiable in this situation.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's getting lost in this is the fact that this is a huge hacking story. So the story of the hack itself has sort of gotten lost in who's participating in Ashley Madison, whether they're doing it themselves or somebody is putting their name in there, or we don't know. And that's the other problem there, is how can you verify this information? If you're
anybody
putting it
can
out
create
there,
a name in anybody's an account in anybody's name.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing that is notable about this, in all honesty, the only reason people care whose information is in this database is because it's a cheating website. It's salacious.
Yeah, it's the morality of it.
Right, it's the morality of it. Nobody cared whose data was actually stolen from Target unless it was your credit card information or your social security number that was part of that.
Yeah, before we get off this, the thing that bothers me even more about this story, you played the little piece from the Australian radio. Of course, what they did was sick and wrong and had nothing at all to do with journalism or public importance.
I don't know if they actually expected that a caller's suspected spouse might actually be on the list. I think they were as shocked as anything else.
But I have to say, as shocking as their behavior was, it's kind of disturbing to me, too, that someone would call in and voluntarily say, yeah, I think my husband may be cheating. Will you look him up on the air? And then, oh, I'm so shocked when I find out that my husband's name is in the database. What will people do for their 15 minutes of fame? It's really sad.
Well, and we also hear the stories coming out of Toronto of two people who had committed suicide in Canada as a result of being named.
And that goes back to I think the point that Mike made, and I think I made this also, is that, what is the actual story here? Mm-hmm. Is it the hacking, or is it these names? And if it is these names, can you verify that? And if you can, why should you put that out there? Are they public figures? Are they public figures that could possibly have some sort of impact on how we live our lives every day, how the government operates, how a major corporation operates, those kinds of things? And I have yet to see that, with the exception of the AP story.
With the exception of the AP story, when this starts being called Gawker Christmas.
Yeah.
Right.
It tells you that that's not what the story is going to be about.
And even with the AP story, although I think they made the case for public importance, how did they verify these people? We talk about how important verification was. They used their credit card information, which was part of that data dump. I'm a little uncomfortable with that too.
Yeah, I mean, that's private information. I mean, if you have someone's credit card information and you, regardless of how you use it, I mean, that could be a criminal offense, or at least a civil offense, if you put that out there.
Okay, well, political reporters and editors, they're in pretty high demand right now as the local and national media beef up their ranks ahead of the 2016 election season. So it's no surprise Cox-owned Rare Media wants to get an aggressive reporter out in the field. What is surprising, maybe, is what management is, or at least was, looking for. The job posting says it seeks a reporter who is less Paula Zahn, more Zoe Barnes. Who is Zoe Barnes, you ask? Well, here's a clip of her character in the Netflix political drama House of Cards.
Okay, so why are you here, Miss Barnes?
I need somebody I can talk to.
We're talking. Tell me what we're talking about.
I protect your identity. I print whatever you tell me, and I'll never ask any questions.
And what makes you think I don't already have such an arrangement with one of your colleagues?
Because if you did, you wouldn't have let me through the door.
She's young, she's shrewd, she's going to do whatever it takes to get that story. She's going to make sure she's first. The job posting, which has since been removed from the Cox Careers website, sought an intrepid reporter who knows the way around Capitol Hill, but may know a thing or two, about the underbelly of our political process. This journalist has no left-right agenda and is beholden only to juicy stories that will be of interest to our readers inside and outside the Beltway. I watched House of Cards until, well, something happens to Zoe's character that, made me decide I was kind of done with the program at that point. Mike, you are our House of Cards fan.
Okay, first of all, if anybody needs a spoiler alert after 2 seasons, she was sleeping with Frank Underwood, the main character, and he pushed her in front of a train, okay, and killed her.
There you go. Okay,
there you
said
go.
it.
But the question, so I get what Cox Media was going for here. They're appealing to a young person who's driven enough to do anything to get the inside story so they can differentiate themselves in covering politics. But what it also suggests, whether they meant it or not, you're willing to sleep with your source in order to do that story and do all kinds of other unethical behaviors that Zoe Barnes commits as part of that show. So I'm sure that they knew what they were getting into, but like so many other things, that Chicago Tribune story about Hurricane Katrina we talked about last week, they really didn't think it all the way through before they posted.
Yeah, to me, it's one of those things where someone in HR should have raised their hand and say, whoa, wait a minute, we're stepping over the line here. And when I see a lot of these things, I keep wondering whether or not there's someone in the room who wants to say, guys, we're about to make a mistake here, but just won't do it because of pressure or whatever. But just to connect to a younger audience, I have a problem with that.
But we're desperate for that. And Cox Media, like everybody else, is trying to find the formula. If you take a look at rare.us, their website, it's all written in a way to try to appeal to younger users. And we'll do just about anything, even stuff like this. And frankly, when you look at who's complaining about this, it's mostly older, more established journalists and critics. I don't know if younger journalists looking for their first jobs might not think that that's perfectly okay.
Well, I would hope that we've done a better job. Yeah,
I was going to say the same thing. I will be the first to say I have urged my students every which way not to go to the extent to which we would see Zoe Barnes going to get the story.
Right, that's not worth it. The story is not worth it.
No.
And I mean the ad, not the behavior.
Okay, fair enough. Just saying. Okay, that music means we're pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about the topics we talked about on today's program. Check out our links blog. It's under the Programs tab at kbia.org. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave us comments, questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next week, and a lot more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, to Maya Jackson, she's our technical director, and KBIA's Pat Akers handled the audio for us today. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.